I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm, a video blog on sovereignty. In this episode, I'm going to be responding to Russell Brand's Under the Skin podcast 192 with Jocko Willink called Compassionate Leadership. Towards the end, Russell asks a question, which is our beauty being harnessed for nefarious ends? I want to phrase that as, is our love being pimped for profit? I'll also be looking at the conflation of sex and violence as adult themes by the movie industry, what the ethics of violence are in relationship to those ends, and whether there are times that preaching nonviolence can be unethical. So let's do this. I want to start by seconding Russell's appreciation for Jocko's integrity and courage and the way that he approaches both civilian life and conflict there and also leadership in the military. I think his trick of imagining that the person being a jerk in traffic has a sick kid or just lost their job is brilliant, because not only does it change the outward behavior, but it also changes the mental anger and allows you to let go of that. I think that he must have been well loved in the military for his way of trusting his team, and the fact that he's bringing that into the corporate world could only make businesses run in a way that was better for their employees. So let's look at the military side first. At one point, Jocko mentions that he didn't bring emotion to the assignments that the Navy SEALs carried out. Assignments, I have to admit, is a very sanitized and bloodless word that could apply to your kids' homework. But let's look at the way that he says that he doesn't bring emotion the same way that a prostitute would not be bringing emotion to the act of sex. I want to go deeper into that analogy. In previous episodes, talked about pole dancing and strippers, in the one with Edward Snowden and with Brett Weinstein, and said that I believe that it's a strong thing for women to be taking power from their own sexuality. I don't feel the same way about prostitution. I think that prostitution is always monetized rape, in the same way as the economic draft. In either case, someone is deciding that they will either have sex or commit violence for hire. And beyond that comparison, there is a world of difference between those two things. The equation of sex and violence in our culture has always puzzled me. I remember when my youngest daughter was about 10, taking the girls to see some dance romance movie with partial nudity and language. And so it was PG-13, but the trailers that they showed were horror films. They traumatized me, they traumatized them. And that rite of passage that seems particular to adolescent boys, where first you invoke the fear and then you learn that you can control it through this vicarious violence. That seems something that's very peculiar to our culture, and I wonder what effect that has on the psyche of boys and what it means to them to be men. So let's look at that simplification of good versus evil and how it plays out today. I've said that there's only one war that's ever been fought, and that's always empire versus sovereignty. It is power over others, or it is power over yourselves. So what is the vision and purpose of our military? I think that a simple test of whether it's on the side of empire or on the side of sovereignty is whether you are in someone else's country. That the term defense doesn't really apply if you're defending yourself from within while occupying someone else's country. And so It goes back to that age-old problem of how did our oil get under their soil? My hometown is on the border of West Virginia, and that's prime recruiting area for the military. I see young people going in with the best of intentions and courage, and often coming out broken. I'm not going to make the argument that violence is always wrong, because I don't believe that. I believe that violence is justified in your own defense and is noble in defense of others. So there's the question. How do we decide what's defense and what's offense? Because no one would need to be fighting in defense if there was not someone who was on the offensive, who was using violence as an act of aggression. I want to quote from Arundhati Roy. She's the Indian activist who became famous for her book, The God of Small Things, and used that platform to become one of the greatest spokespeople for justice in the world. She's written Walking with the Comrades, which was her experience with the Maoists of India, who are the guerrilla movement protecting the communities. They are an armed insurgency, like the Zapatistas in Mexico. In another book, she has Things That Can and Cannot Be Said. This is when she and Daniel Ellsberg and John Cusack met with Edward Snowden in Moscow. And she talks about how the social movements ended up becoming NGOized, that they became Gandhiized around 2013, where there was a decision about the time that they all got funded by big foundations that they would not support any violent movement, any violent resistance movement. And so here's what she says. If there are people who live in villages deep in the forest, 4 days' walk from anywhere, and 1,000 soldiers arrive and burn their villages and kill and rape people to scare them off their land because mining companies want it, what brand of nonviolence would the stalwarts of the establishment recommend? Nonviolence is radical political theater. And John Cusack replies, effective only when there's an audience. And she talks about who can pull in an audience. You know, Gandhi's a superstar. He can. But indigenous people in the forest don't have that kind of drawing power. So what she says is nonviolence should be a tactic, not an ideology preached from the sidelines to victims of massive violence. I think we need to be looking at who we use our voices to support and not take the easy way out of saying violence is always wrong when we're sitting in our comfy little armchairs and they're in the villages that are being burned. So how does this relate to Jocko's current position teaching leadership in corporations? I think that we are all selling our bodies. Prostitutes are just more honest about it. We're selling our bodies in terms of our time. We've been deprived of the ability to do what our heart wants, which is serve our communities. There's a difference between the job that someone does and the job that they're paid for. The job that they do is wonderful. Teachers are some of the most subversive people I've ever known. The jobs that we do are magnificent. They're things that we're doing out of love. But the job that we're paid for is always to make the rich richer. If you look at Russell, what he's doing is incredible. He is a radical subversive. But the job that he's paid for is to bring in advertisers, to bring in viewers so that they can sell ads. And so he's another hooker in the YouTube stable. My favorite one, I might add. If Russell is your favorite hooker in the YouTube brothel, or you want to find out why he's mine, here's the very first video that I ever made. I'm now up to 30 that are on Russell's interviews. And it talks about why he is such a good co-conspirator for me, because we agree on 5 major agenda points, which I talk about in this video. So I hope that you look at them, and even though we don't agree on everything, why it's so important to have these core beliefs in a worldview. And I hope that you subscribe. Thank you.